The Ultimate Ears Reference Remastered, or UERR, is an earphone from the company's professional line designed to have an extremely flat sound signature, meaning the earphone is supposed to be able to present all frequency ranges, from bass to treble with equal attention without bias. Having a neutral sounding earphone is crucial to someone who works in studios because they need gear that's able to accurately play back whatever soundtracks they're mixing and equalizing, and the UERR is designed specifically for that, especially considering it, along with the original Ultimate Ears reference monitor, are all developed in partnership with Capitol Studios. Yes, that Capitol Studios. While this earphone is normally sold as custom IEMs that are tailor-made to match one's ears, it can be found as universal pairs in certain regions and platforms. A few months back, Massdrop dropped basically the whole line of UE Pro earphones in universal shells, refreshed with the latest IPX connector, including the UE7, UE11, UE18 Plus Pro, UERR and UE Live, and they are available in 40 different colorways. I picked up the UERR in the Snow White colorway, and after 1 month and a week of time, the earphone finally came and I fell absolutely in love with it. It's the most technical sounding, most balanced, and the best fitting earphone I've ever had the pleasure to experience, and I'm just going to get this out of the way. I dare say this is the perfect earphone for me. But there's just this one regret I have with it that makes me really want to forget I ever bought it a few months back, and I'll tell you what it is in this video. But before that, this is Earphoneus Fanaticus, and here I present you my review of the Ultimate Ears Reference Remastered IPX Edition. So let's just get this regret of mine out of the way immediately. I don't actually have the earphone anymore. No, I didn't sell it. I lost it 4 weeks after getting it, and I don't know how I really lost it. All I know is I went out one night with friends and drank a lot, and after some commuting without me actually being aware of what's going on around me, I ended up in another district in midnight all by myself. I found that I lost my phone alongside the earphone, so I walked along trying to search for them in the dark, but as fate would have it, I just couldn't for the hell of me find them. So what did I do? Well, there was nobody around, so I did only the most logical thing given the circumstances. I sat down and slept. Yup, just like that. I legit slept like a hobo on the street overnight. Fortunately, in the next morning, I was able to find my phone thanks to GPS, but unless I missed this year's CES or something, earphones these days don't have GPS. So yeah, $800 gone just like that. I still have all the accessories and the box and just about everything else. Not the earphone though. Actually, I also lost a pair of the new CP100 that SpinFit sent over for review, and that should be the video before this. This was the reason why that review took so long. But yeah, that's what's happened. I say there's regrets in this for me because if I didn't buy them, I wouldn't have lost them. Now, there are two options for me, and they're both expensive. Either I get a custom pair done since I like them so much anyway, or I can buy the universal version again from Massdrop, seeing that I can actually get the fancy faceplates for free because it's UE's 25th anniversary this year. I don't know what I will do yet, but I'll just say that losing my favorite pair of earphones sucks despite my short time with it. RIP earphone and RIP my bank account. So if I don't have the earphone anymore, how am I supposed to get enough footage for this review? Well, I did shoot something the first few days I got them, but some of the footage I have already used in my unboxing, so if there's anything you have seen before, that's your reason. Anyway, let's finally get back to the review. I want to start by talking about the housing and the drivers. Like I said in the beginning, there are many options to choose from for the faceplate on Massdrop, and I chose the boring Snow White colorway because it is the most iconic colorway on the UERR. Ultimate Ears uses a transparent material for the rest of the housing, which is actually surprisingly attractive to look at, and the cable matches it really well. Though in terms of aesthetics, it is hard to ignore the mishmash of colors of the wires and the copious amount of glue used to mount the driver casing. This is not the first time UE has done this, just look up any review on the UE900 and 900S. But anyway, I think the build quality is fantastic really. It feels solid, has no bubbles and no rough edges around the housing, and the fonts are sharply printed. Being a universal earphone, its shape is designed to fit as many people's ears as possible, all the while attempting to provide a custom fit. But if I'm ever asked to imagine what CIM should feel like in my ears, I would say the fit of this pair should be at least 95% there. Of course, with great fit comes great isolation, and I'm happy to report that the isolation is second to only active noise cancelling. I can put this on while taking the bus or trains and hear so little of the surrounding, allowing me to enjoy more of the nuances in the music. Now, of course, we can achieve that kind of listening experience with just about any earphone by turning the volume way up. Just drown out the noise. Yeah, I mean, who cares about noise when you are deaf already? No big deal. Now, aside from protecting your ears and still allowing you to enjoy the music fully, good isolation also means the earphone should be able to deliver low frequencies to a healthy extent without relying on crazy bass boost. Before I move away from fit, I have just this last bit to add. I wrote down on my notebook when I still had the earphone that it provides dangerously good isolation. What do I mean by that? Well, I meant that walking on the streets wearing this is a potential hazard. I wouldn't know when cars are moving my way, and if cars are indeed moving my way, I wouldn't hear other people yelling at me to stop. That's just how good the isolation really is on the UERR. I've given this kind of comments for the Massdrop Plus in the past, but it applies even more to this earphone. On both earpieces, we can see 3 proprietary balanced armature drivers, and 2 of them are absolute units, to quote the cool kids these days. I mean, seriously, look at this one. Ultimate Ears used to call these drivers their Pro-Tune tone drivers, but the description given now is this: 3 proprietary balanced armatures with multiple passive crossover points, multiple being 3 by the way, and triple bore sound channels. It's a bit hard to see from this photo, but there are separate filters for each of the bores. This diagram tells us what each of the drivers is, and it's quite interesting to look at. It depicts the mid BA and high BA being the same structure, and the low BA just beneath them. I find it interesting that it points at the back of the high BA, calling it the mid BA, even though there's really no good reason for it to be there, and that spot should be where audio signals come in instead of the high BA. I also don't see a sound tube extending from here to the nozzle, so I'm super confused. Now, I think based on the observation that the higher the frequency, the smaller the driver on top should actually be the mid driver, and the high driver actually sits rather awkwardly in front of the huge bass driver like a tumor. Here's a shot of the bores. There are 2 smaller bores and a bigger bore arranged in a triangle. Perhaps a surprising observation for a typical music lover, but a well-known design for audiophiles like yourselves, is that the big bore actually delivers high frequency, while the top and bottom bores are for mid and low frequencies respectively. I mean, I would think the mid driver is the one to use the big bore, because that way you should be able to hear more of the melody and vocals. Maybe the bore size has to do with the effect of diffraction on different frequencies. Would be great if we can get some UE engineers to chime in, but they probably aren't even watching this. Sob. Now, even though I don't have this earphone with me anymore, I did actually wonder if the original UERR was any different. The shop that I went to did still have the original, so I took some visuals. Besides the different cable connectors, we can also see the drivers are positioned differently from the IPX edition. Comparing between these 2 images, we can see the bass driver is still in the same position, but the mid and high BA sit farther away in the original. They don't form a stack, and instead a 3-prong piece is used to guide the sound. That 3-prong piece looks like this if you don't know what I'm talking about. There's still sound guide in the IPX version, of course, but it's shaped differently and is more transparent, just like the housing itself. Maybe it's just well worn, but there's no denying that the IPX version looks way prettier. Let's briefly touch on impedance and sensitivity. Impedance is rated at 37.5 ohms, which is within typical range for IEMs. The 1/8 rule tells us that for all the balanced armatures to sound like how they are designed to be, output impedance can be no greater than 4.375 ohms. If it gets any higher, some frequency ranges will be boosted or weakened. People sometimes manipulate this to make an earphone darker or brighter sounding, but for those like me who just wants it to perform as expected, you should want something lower. But really, 4.375 ohms is quite lenient in terms of impedance matching, and I expect this earphone to perform as UE intended on most if not all portable sources we use these days. Sensitivity is rated at 105 decibels, and coupled with the 37.5 ohms impedance, you don't have to worry about static noise or the earphone straight up demolishing your ears because of high volume. Like I showed you just now, there are two versions of the UERR, one using the classic UE 2-pin connector, and this one which uses a connector that works like MMCX but is much more secure and smaller in profile. So yes, Massdrop is indeed selling us the latest version, not some new old stock. UE calls this new connector the IPX connector, that technically is based on Astron's T2 connector with some improvements. It is compatible with cables that use T2 connection, but you will lose the water and sweat proofing capability as promised by its IP67 certification. Astron already claims that their company's T2 system boasts many benefits that I will just show you on screen, and the fact that UE is able to improve it by adding waterproofing to the equation just makes the whole system all the more attractive to professionals and heavy music listeners. Don't think it means you can drench the whole earpiece into water and be fine though, it's just the connection that gets waterproofing. Now, I only had the earphone for a little more than a month before losing it, so I can't exactly tell you how durable it really is, but I do remember first wondering about what connection is used on my UERR, and because of how hard it was to turn, I mistook it for some kind of super small 2-pin connection. I also couldn't really unplug the earpiece from it from the little effort that I spent, so I would say this IPX thing should be very durable. The cable is called the Ultimate Ears SuperBax cable, which can be purchased separately for $200 US. It is very thin but exquisite to touch. With it being mostly an Astron cable, the metal strands are not surprisingly wrapped in a medical grade material that is mostly transparent and slightly sticky on first touch. Sticky, but not the icky type, if you know what I mean. Surprisingly, UE has listed the specs of the cable in excruciating details. The metal used is silver-plated copper. Copper has a very low resistivity that is only bested by silver, but it is way cheaper, so the use of such combination is not surprising considering the price. The metal wires are in a Litz configuration which aims to reduce skin effects, the effect where alternating electric current or AC has a tendency to go through the surface of the wires instead of going through the whole cross-section of the wires, effectively making them less conductive. This has a larger effect on AC of higher frequencies. So instead of using a single solid rod of metal wire, a Litz configuration uses many extremely thin wires as conductors, so that AC is always practically traveling through the whole wire by virtue of how thin each of the individual wires are. Whether this really affects audio quality is not something I can comment on, but at least that's how the scientific explanation goes. With 168 strands of wires, the final impedance is 0.75 ohms, which is very low but can get certainly lower. Overall, I think most people should not have to worry about purchasing third-party cables, but if they do decide to do that, they should go for something that's shorter, thicker, and uses silver wires instead of silver-plated copper, which of course jacks up the price to an obscene level. The wire split has an interesting locking mechanism. When it is locked, the choker cannot go up. Good mechanism here, but I think pulling the choker itself might cause some damage in the long run, but again, I cannot verify that. The cable terminates with a relatively big, right-angled 3.5mm jack that doesn't feature any cable relief, so this might also hurt its durability. The earphone comes with quite a few accessories. Firstly, you get 6 pairs of silicone tips from very small to very large, as well as 3 pairs of UE's own foam tips in small, medium, and large. I actually never got around to trying out the foam tips because I mostly stuck with the silicone tips and SpinFit CP100, but I can tell you with how long the nozzle of the UERR is, even the smallest foam tips would have been too big anyway. The texture of the foam tips is similar to Shure's foam tips, but UE's tips definitely expand way quicker, which is not ideal because by the time you have squeezed them, when you wear the earpiece, the tips would have expanded already. defeating the idea behind how foam tips are supposed to be used. Regarding the stock tips, at first I tried medium size, but it is way too big because the nozzle goes really deep to the point where I had to go all the way down to the smaller size. But regardless of what size you look at, something common among these is that they all have a really big opening measuring at 6.5mm, which is only a tiny bit smaller than the JVC spiral dots. This should help with creating height in the soundstage, as well as making sure lower frequencies are boosted less by diffraction at the opening. Opening at the bottom is around 4.5mm, but because of the shape of the nozzle, even those with 4mm opening can fit, like the new SpinFit CP100. Besides ear tips, you also get a case with a screw-on lid. This is the same case that comes with CIEM orders, but instead of saying handcrafted for reference remastered like this one, you can choose to have your name printed on instead. Exterior of this case is made of metal, but the interior is plastic, which explains its lightweight. There's practically no padding inside apart from some paper-thin foam. When you unbox this earphone, you'll find it packed inside a little pouch. This is the same pouch used for the UE900 as well. You can also find a cleaning tool and a buffer jack for use on planes. Overall, you get a very standard set of accessories. Now let's talk about sound quality of the Ultimate Ears Reference Remastered. Obviously, I don't have it with me now, so I won't be able to give you a very detailed description for the things that I normally talk about in my reviews, and I hadn't carried out any technical tests including bass rattling, dynamic range, and perceived frequency response. Heck, I can't even do ear tip compatibility tests now. But luckily, I did make quite a few comments on my notebook when I auditioned it with my on-cue DPX1A audio player, ACG mode turned on, lock ring adjust at +2, and digital filter set to sharp. Soundtracks I tested with include a wide mix of lossless files and playback from Tidal. I tested many genres with it: rap, rock, heavy metal, death metal, classical music, Japanese and Cantonese pop music, EDM. This earphone is a reference monitor after all, so I expect it to excel with all genres of music. Let's start with bass. I think bass presentation on the UERR is truly one of a kind. If you're in the impression that bass boost must be present for any IEM to achieve good bass or be able to sufficiently play back sub-bass, or that balanced amateurs can't produce good bass, I think you'll be very surprised by how effortlessly the UERR plays back sub-bass and bass despite having an exceedingly flat response in this range. It gives you details in the bass not by artificially turning up the volume, but rather in a very technical way. It doesn't wow you with copious amounts of deep rumble, but rumble it does, and man, it does so in a very controlled way with fantastic resolution. In a certain way, the bass response reminds me of the Sony MDR EX1000 with its natural sounding, warm but mostly flat bass, but UERR does show better definition and texturing. This is surprising to me as well, because the original UERR sports an almost flat bass, but it was never able to reach the same level of technicality the UERR presents. So I think frequency response alone can't explain the difference. Instead, the major factors here are probably the perfect fit the earphone provides and the size of the driver. Firstly, perfect fit means less sound leakage, and low frequency tends to be the one that really suffers from leakage. Secondly, bigger driver means more air can be pushed, allowing for better extension in the lower frequencies. Speaking of extension, while I never had the chance to see how low I can hear with the UERR using test files, from what I hear using music with really deep sub-bass, I have no doubt that it can easily reach 10Hz without a hitch. I would say, however, that for those who prefer more warmth and doesn't exactly care about seeing the bass, you might be better off with earphones that use diaphragm drivers for low frequency, but resolution would never be as good. Next, let's move on to the mids. The thing I remember the most about the mids is how dense and resolving it is. This might once again be due to how big the mids BA really is. I specifically recorded on my notes my experience listening to Poco Allegretto by Brahms, which is a piece full of string instruments and really tests an IEM's ability to produce melodic lines that are smooth yet dynamic. UERR did exactly just that by depicting violin with particular accuracy and nuances. That's just a fancier way of saying it plays back violin just like how violins should sound. I think the UERR has a certain quality of authoritativeness that allows me to vividly and clearly see the musical elements. When it comes to vocals, I think the singers are always balanced well against main melody. And even there are a bunch of elements like percussions and layers of instruments going on, the singers are never drowned out. And yet, I don't necessarily think it avoids that by giving too much elevation to vocals. However, some might yearn for more warmth in the lower mids, which should make male vocals and cello richer, but then the UERR is supposed to be completely flat from bass to mids anyway, so adding volume to lower mids would defeat this purpose. Overall, between low frequency, mid frequency and high frequency, I would say the mids is probably where this earphone shines the brightest, with the other ranges being very close seconds. Finally, let's talk about treble on the UERR. Listening to the UERR really questions my preference for treble shimmer and bright sound signature. Coming from earphones like the AKG K3003, N5005 and the Unique Melody Maverick, which I've all praised for possessing bright yet non-intrusive treble, as well as having good impression on earphones such as OnQ E900M and Noble Audio Savannah, I have to say that, at first, I found the treble on the UERR to be lackluster. I like a bit more treble than most people do, because I always believe that this is necessary to make cymbals and bowing instruments like violins sound more realistic and textured. I also like the shimmer and airiness that comes with such tuning. The UERR, on the other hand, doesn't have the treble elevation that I like, but after listening to it for 1 hour or so, I found myself actually preferring this presentation over other earphones. It's hard to put into words what the UERR does when it comes to high frequencies. The amount is always just right. Never too little so that the music sounds dark and boring, and never too much so that it distracts you from enjoying the melody and bass. Sibilance and fatigue are pretty much not a thing for this earphone. Despite lacking the shimmer on, say, the Unique Melody Maverick, you can always hear the cymbals when it's supposed to be present. They are never drowned out and has good shaping. They are never played back as just sounds in the high frequencies, but rather sounds clearly from cymbals. This, in my opinion, is ultimately the kind of treble that all earphones should strive for. Don't let it be distracting, but when you want to give it attention in your mind, you can clearly hear it, or even see it in an imaginative way. Let's look at other aspects of sound quality apart from signature. Starting with soundstage, thanks to the large earpiece and big drivers, the UERR is able to produce tall and dense soundstage. There's some level of vertical layering present, but it is not significant because of the bore configuration. Had they swapped the positions of the mid bore and the high bore, we would be able to hear musical elements in the treble range on top, melody and vocals in the middle, and bass at the bottom. I don't remember much about horizontal soundstage or positioning, but I do think the soundstage is sufficiently wide, though not as wide as the Sony MDR EX1000. I also want to briefly touch on dynamic range and ear tip matching. Like I said before, I lost the earphones, so I can't do objective tests on dynamic range, but because the UERR always sounds authoritative even when volume is low, it has no obvious peaks in any of the frequency range that would skew its tonal balance, and coupled with how good the drivers are, I would have to guess the dynamic range must be pretty damn good. And regarding ear tip, I only tried the new SpinFit CP100 in both the small size and medium sizes. I was gonna review them by trying them out with the UERR after all. I started with medium, thought it was too big and switched to the small sizes, but ended up switching back to medium size before losing the earphone. It fits better than the stock silicone tips, and I thought it sounded great with the earphone, though I can't tell you exactly in what ways sonic improvements are made. I also tried putting on the JVC spiral dots, but they didn't fit the nozzle right because of how far away the groove on the nozzle is from the terminal end. I wish I tried the SpinFit CP100 with it, because I think its big opening should help expand the vertical soundstage even further. I regret buying the Ultimate Ears Reference Remastered because my time with it was so short. It's an earphone that I had wanted for so long, and when I finally got it, I lost it in just a few weeks. Though monetary loss certainly stings, what troubles me even more is how much I miss its sound even now. I genuinely think it is the best earphone for my listening and monitoring preferences, and even though I had looked into other expensive IEMs ever since, I just can't find anything that's anywhere as perfect as this earphone. There are earphones by UE that sound like it, such as the UE7 and the UE18 Plus, but UE7 shows less mids, slightly more bass, and is not as 3D sounding, while the UE18 Plus is not as balanced, not as 3D sounding, and for whatever reason, produces bass that's more punchy and sharp than reverberant. I even tried the Jabin exclusive Fit-Ear TG335, which I actually really liked, but it has a different signature and is twice as expensive. So I still haven't found anything besides the UERR that can replace, well, the UERR. I might end up just getting a custom version of it, but I want to do it when there's a discount, and so far that has not come yet, even though our local Hong Kong distributor actually provided discounts for the other UE models. Fantastic prices to be had, but just not the right product. Anyway, this will conclude the review. Sorry for the long hiatus, but I do have another IEM that I got recently that will go into unboxing and review in the hopefully not too distant future. So please subscribe to my channel and turn on bell notifications so that you know when new videos come out. This is Earphoneus Fanaticus, and I'll see you again very soon.